Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Proper Varian and this is Crusader Kings 3. This is Dev Diary number 42 and today we're going to talk about the patch notes of the patch 1.1 that will come out tomorrow on the 29th of September. I'm incredibly excited. I was almost resignated to this happening only in October, but now we're here and we're getting the patch tomorrow and it is an absolutely massive one. An actually massive patch. Are you seeing the outline here on the right side? My god, the scroll bar is just like, this is insanity. Essentially what I did was, I looked over this thing, I looked at everything, I read every single patch note so that you wouldn't have to, and I marked everything that is most important to know. There are many more changes, of course, localization, there are some balancing changes that I won't really mention here, but I only want to discuss what is most relevant for you as a player and what you should know when it comes to what you need to expect in the 1.1 patch. I'm incredibly excited because after reading it, my god, almost everything has been patched. The only thing that I couldn't really spot here that I thought would be, patch worthy is essentially the thing that I showed off not too long ago. When somebody constructs anything in your realm, then you can cancel that construction and get the money back despite, obviously you not investing that money into that building. That isn't patched, but then again, you don't have to exploit it if you don't want to, and you shouldn't, let's be real, but let's jump straight in. There's so much time you're going to be spent just on the patch notes. I don't think I have any time to waste on sitting here and thinking about the fact that, at the end of the day, there is so much going on here. Let's start with the game balance. Being unable to inherit titles no longer blocks claim inheritance. This is really good. Let's continue. The castrated bastard and disinherited traits still block claim inheritance only from within your dynasty for disinherited. This is really nice because it makes it so that you can disinherit somebody, make them king of, for example, Hungary when you are sitting in England, and then those kingdoms will never fuse together. Those are now split because obviously he can't inherit anything from dynasty members from home, but he will indeed have a claim on Hungary if, for example, his mother was the Hungarian princess. This is really nice, just cleans up the game a bit. Building a new temple now gives much more piety. You can't do it too often anyways. Building temples is really useless, by what I mean that in the base version, it was practically almost preferable to build either a castle or a city. Building a temple now, making it so that it gives you much more piety, I think is really, really good. What a great change. I really just want to highlight that because that makes it much easier to, for example, reform a heresy or rather reform a faith, to create a heresy and so on and so forth. Maybe even to convert to Hellenism without having to, go the human sacrifice route. Clan rulers now desire fewer spouses the lower their tiers. This is really good, already implemented in the insular Christianity. Clan rulers, so I assume feudal rulers already did it, but I assume clan rulers did not. The piety penalty only triggers if they are below desired spouses. The numbers are Baron Count 1, Dukes 2, Kings 3, and Emperors 4. That's exactly how insular also works, so this is nice, it just works, and it also makes it so that, for example, the Seljuks will no longer blob out by having 1 million family members, because many of their family members were counts and took 4 wives. Now that is a thing of the past. They will only have 1 additional spouse. Actually, no, that's entirely incorrect. If they're a count, they will only have 1 spouse, no additional spouse, and they won't take a piety hit either. I think this is great for game balance, and it makes it so that you aren't pressured, or the AI isn't pressured to constantly take additional spouses. The piety hit from being below desired spouses has been doubled, so when you are below, then it is more intense, and I think that is very valuable. When I played the Zirid series, in the Zirid series, essentially, I just ignored the spouse because the piety hit was something like 0.6 or something. It's nothing, but now that it is doubled, I think that can be quite the effect, making it so that, especially clan rulers will split more often via the Confederate partition succession. Here we go. Denying call to arms now costs fame, potentially reducing a level of fame. Denying offensive wars has a small impact, but denying defensive calls have a massive impact. I think this is pretty cool. It was way too easy in CK3 1.0 to sit down, or 1.0.3 technically speaking, to sit down and just say no to every single war that an ally called you in, because I believe there was no prestige penalty for you. There was just for them, of course, if you were to accept. And then on top of that, there was also the thing where they took, I want to say, either -10 or -20 negative opinion. And now this has also changed. Denying a defensive war now reduces opinion with the ally by -50, and denying an offensive war reduces opinion with the ally by -20. So that is 25 years and 5 years. This is actually quite significant, because the way this works is that the alliance obviously doesn't break. You still have the marital bonds, but it means that they will be much, much less likely to actually come to your wars, making it so that, for example, if you do want to say no to a defensive war, you will have to send them some money, making it so that their opinion shoots up again. I think this is really good for balancing purposes, makes it so that it is much more responsive, and makes it so that it's much more interesting who you are actually allied to, because if you can't and don't want to help them, then, well, they're not going to help you either with these new penalties. Electors should now be less inclined to form or join independence factions unless they're another faith than their liege. I think this is actually huge. Should also make it so that in 1066 the HRE doesn't all the time fall apart, because essentially in 1066 Bohemia will always end up in the Independence League, making it so that the Independence League is strong enough to declare independence. This should be a thing of the past with this one, at least I hope so, because they are an elector in the game. And I think honestly that's pretty cool. I really like the idea here to fix the HRE, not by making anybody weaker, but just by making it so, you know, that anybody that is already implemented in the power structure of the realm, so in the elective power structure, that they will not join an independence faction. Also makes it so that, for example, Scandinavian elective in general will be quite a bit more forgiving, because many more people, let's say you take over, for example, England with a lot of Anglo-Saxon rulers, then they will just say, hey, you know what, this is fine, I'm still voting, so we're all good. I think this should work splendidly as well. For player cultures, the culture had now updates within a month when one ruler becomes bigger than another, and for player dynasties, the dynasty now takes at most 1 month to update when someone else becomes more than 10% stronger, rather than up to a year. The thing about this one was that I can't describe to you how many people I saw that said, hey, there's a bug, I'm the strongest house leader and I'm not becoming the dynasty head, because nowhere in-game did it anywhere say, hey, it'll take some time to update. Now the fact that this has been reduced makes it so that it is almost instant. You know, within a month, that is at most essentially the thing that you have to wait for, and I think that is also really nice. Makes it so that, you know, you don't have to tell people, hey, it takes time to update, because that update is almost instantaneous. A good change, and I think also actually a change that, you know, is quite acceptable for performance, because this is only for the player. The AI still updates, you know, sometimes after only a year has passed. The AI is much more likely to demand the conversion of heretical vassals if their refusal would result in them being marked as criminals. So essentially it just makes it so, hey, I will ask you, and if you refuse, I can revoke you, so I will ask you. I think that is very smart, makes it so that realms can stick together and can be much more stable than they would otherwise be if they have heresies or if they have otherwise non-believers. This should make the AI less likely to collapse to heresy. It was one of those things that I wasn't really a fan of. What I mean by that is that in 1066, you will most of the time, even despite the Vikings not existing and whatnot, you will most of the time see Christianity falter if you go with any setting that isn't normal religious conversion rate. And that is because whenever there is a heresy outbreak, Catholicism was just never able to reconvert the rulers and the lands, making it so that there were permanent uprisings. Even if at some point the rulers were to change their religion back to the original one, the realm would still be mad. This being changed, making it so that, you know, the AI is much more effective when it comes to going against heretics. I think that is a great change. Should make it so that Catholicism can also stand tall for quite some time more. Denying a conversion request now gives the leisure revoke reason, in addition to the imprisonment reason they already got. This is nice because it just makes it so that essentially when you're a vassal, it is much more attractive to choose the vassal protective contract that makes it so that the, you know, your liege can't revoke your titles. I think that is also a great change, making it so that the vassal contracts in detail become even more important. Outbreaks of heresy now increase the fervor of the affected faith much more positively. This means that large faiths are more likely to bounce back to max fervor after a heresy outbreak. So I want to say, and I'm not entirely certain about the numbers, but I want to say that in 1.0.3, a heresy outbreak would bring 20% fervor for the religion that experiences this. So Catholicism being at 60%, then there's a heresy outbreak, and now it's at 80. Let's say it's now 30 or 40%. That would actually be really nice, because instead of having 2 huge heresy outbreaks that only bring you up from 60 to 100, you just need 1, and all of a sudden you're back at 100. I think that is nice, should make it so that Catholicism is very, very stable. I know this was a core point for a lot of you, for a lot of the people that were playing the game just in general, and I completely agree with that, of course. This should, again, much like the heretic revocation situation that is introduced here in the new patch, should make it so that Catholicism and, most importantly, at least to me, the Holy Roman Empire should be very, very stable. If you have partition and your primary title has a special election form, the heir to that title will be the primary heir for your petition and get a share as long as they're a valid player heir, even if they otherwise wouldn't have been part of the petition or later in the petition order. So this one I was actually interested in. Let me explain it this way. If you're the king of England and you have 3 sons, you have a firstborn, secondborn, and thirdborn, but you elect via the Witten election, you elect, let's say, your brother. In 1.0.3, your brother only gets the de jure capital of England, which is London, and nothing else. I thought that this was intended, but a few days back, maybe even a week back, maybe even longer, it was Maneth that confirmed that this was not intended. Instead, and this is essentially what this patch note says right here, instead what happens is now the brother that you are electing will be treated as your firstborn. Your firstborn will be treated as your secondborn as your thirdborn, and your thirdborn as your fourthborn. That should make elective succession much more viable. You know, there is of course a lot more work involved in making succession work when it is elective, because you need people to vote for you, be it out of fear, be it out of love, or be it because you are simply force hooking them into voting for your candidate. I think that this should work quite well. I'm very excited for that change in particular, because it just makes elective succession so much more viable. Increased cooldown on asking vassal to convert faith to 15 years. Of course, that makes sense, because now that you ask them, it gives you an actual revocation reason, which is huge, and you can only do that every 15 years. If it had a shorter cooldown, you could just abuse that mechanic. Makes perfect sense to me. It is now harder to murder someone you're at war with or murder the vassal's courtiers. The maximum success chance secrecy of abduct scheme are now 85%. It is now practically impossible to abduct someone you're at war with a lesser penalty to their vassal's courtiers. It is now much harder to scheme to abduct ruler, especially foreign rulers and subjects at a foreign court. Knights will more often gain prowess and blade master traits in battle. Now, the last one wasn't really related to this, but this cluster here is essentially the answer to abduction schemes being too powerful. There is now a higher chance that you will be discovered, and there is now a higher chance, of course, once you are discovered, that your success chance plummets with your agents being, you know, torn out of the plot. And then the last thing is, since you can't really, it's almost impossible is what they say, well, practically, I guess, it's practically impossible now to imprison somebody, or rather abduct somebody that you are at war with, making it so that it should kind of nerf the strategy where you abduct someone that you're at war with. That is an exploit strategy here in the base version of the game. Now, I still think that abduction is possible. If you're really good, you can probably still abduct someone, and right before the abduction scheme fires, declare a war, right? That should still work, because you still get that chance, let's say, for example, 80, 90%, something like that. And if you can make that happen, then you can still use this strategy, but it is significantly harder anyway, since it's harder to abduct people from a foreign court. So it's not impossible to win a war via abduction, but you have to plan it a bit more meticulously than just, hey, I can randomly declare wars and practically immediately abduct you. The Pechenegs are now a bit more stable at GameStop. That's nice. The Pechenegs, if you don't know that, they rule over essentially Western Ukraine, Moldavia, and then the eastern part of Romania, and I see everything essentially that is past the past Romania and the Ukrainian border there. Everything just becomes independent all the time. The Pechenegs fall apart all the time in the base version. I think that's a great change as well. Just makes the region more interesting. Rebalance debts so that it now comes in levels. The higher the level, the harsher the penalties. Penalties include levy reductions to make severely indebted realms collapse easier. This is really nice. Right now, when you go in debt, you just get a couple of negative perks. You know, it's just like, okay, we have a levy, for example, less money comes in from this. There's like corrupt sheriffs, there's like county effects and all that sort of stuff. But with this, it's actually really nice. If you are highly in debt, it is very likely that factions will fire, that there will be external enemies declare war against you and whatnot. This is a nice change to make debt less tenable, to make debt less feasible to go through, you know. If you're like minus 100 in debt, okay, maybe you can finish that and be positive again within a year if you're, for example, Bohemia or the Emperor. But if you are minus 1000 in debt, I mean, that is practically a death sentence, right? And I think it should be. I think that is exactly how that should be treated. For example, if you declare a war against somebody and then you lose it, you will also have to give them a bunch of money, and that can essentially destroy your realm, which, well, I mean, that's literally how it went historically. The next one is, I love that one, vastly empowered the Mongol Empire's armies. Now you will truly learn to fear the horsemen of the steppe. Temujin and Co now start off with substantial prowess scores. Temujin now starts with a full roster of knights, as well as a few Han siege engineers. The Mongol Empire is now much more aggressive and will attack several times per year if opportunity arises. Weak realms are now much more likely to agree to the subjugation by the Mongol Empire. The Borjigin dynasty is no longer obscure and starts with a warfare legacies unlocked. This is excellent. It's excellent, and there will be another patch note later on about the Mongols, but this is absolutely excellent. And let me just, oh, nope, didn't mean to do that. I don't know what that was, but this is absolutely excellent because the Mongols went absolutely nowhere. I tested this pre-release even, and my god, yeah, this is long. You can see it right here. I tested this pre-release even, and my criticism at the time essentially was the Mongols are cool because they now do have this effect where they fall apart on the death of their great Khan. They fall apart into the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, Chagatai, and Mongolia, but they never actually get anywhere, meaning all of that mechanic is useless. Now that the Mongols are more aggressive, are stronger and are more guaranteed to win because of their amazing knights and siege engineers and whatnot. I'm very, very hopeful. I really, really hope that in the first time lapse that I will do for 1.1, the Mongol Empire actually makes it all the way to the Black Sea, makes it all the way to Persia, and actually falls apart into what they are supposed to fall apart into, because since you can swear fealty to them before they attack you and wipe you out, it's actually really neat. It is just a change up for like 50, 60, 70 years in that entire region if it works. Let's hope, fingers crossed, that it does. I now need a strong hook to force acceptance of ask to take the vows. Weak hooks give a bit of acceptance instead. This is nice, because they did buff. I'm not going to talk about that too much. It's essentially just a buff mechanic. We're going to go into that a bit later. But they did buff ask to take the vows quite a bit in this upcoming patch. Needing a strong hook makes it so that intrigue characters can actually, you know, win out on that. It means also that you can't just force every single of your children into it, because weak hooks now make it so that there is just a higher acceptance chance. And, well, you know, your children, of course, you have weak hooks on all of them by default. The AI is now more inclined to buy certain men-at-arms based on their culture. Very cool. More variety there is always nice. The AI is now much more likely to request money from the head of faith, especially if their head of faith is very rich. This is good because essentially the money that the head of faith gives comes from Sikh indulgences and whatnot, and it never gets cycled back into the actual economy. It's a bit of a weird situation. You have the Pope sitting around with about 10,000 bucks, that sort of stuff, right? It's also very easily exploitable if you were to banish that character, for example. So I'm definitely a big fan of this. I think this is nice. This is a good change. Makes it so that the AI will have more money, makes it so that the AI is stronger, and at the end of the day, I think that is what is necessary to buff the AI a bit in their war capabilities. The AI will now account for bankruptcy when considering white peace. Starting at minus 100 gold, the AI will then progressively pursue white peace more as they fall deeper into debt. Minus 2 year of income, 4 year of income, etc, etc. Offsetting this by how close they are to winning. At 80 or above war score, the AI will try to toughen it out, as the winnings from the war is more likely to outweigh the expenses of maintaining their army. A really good change that goes hand in hand with this staggered bankruptcy approach. At the end of the day, I think this is absolutely beautiful. It just goes so you know, deeper into the idea of we have an economy and the AI realizes that there is an economy and that they have certain abilities and don't have certain abilities in other cases. It really gives me hope in particular because I am hoping that maybe the first DLC could be trade and economy. I mean, that would be amazing. I would love that, you know? So like, if this is sort of the first taste of that, I think we are on the correct route, because this essentially introduces the AI to the idea and the concept of, hey, maybe being 800 in debt isn't the best idea. Great stuff. The Exclave Independence game rule now triggers closer to succession for AI rulers. If anybody wants to point out what that means, because I don't know, I marked it because I'm not certain, let me know. Because, I mean, Exclave Independence game rule always triggers on succession, so I don't actually know exactly what that means. Maybe it's just like in the way that the game proceeds about it, like when it does the check, for example, right? For example, if you split, you are a Confederate partition, does it check it now before the titles are handed out to the heirs, or does it check that afterwards? I'm not certain what it means, but I'm interested in it. The renown gained from alive dynasty members is now capped at 2 per month. So the maximum renown that you get from alive dynasty members is coming from 100 dynasty members. Anybody above that means absolutely nothing for renown gain. I love it. The bane of my existence. The Seljuks finishing every single legacy in like 1200. No longer a thing. It's gone. They can no longer make the dreaded 24 renown a month just by having that many dynasty members. Great change. Tiny footnote here, you know, in all of these, in this mess of patches, or rather of patch notes, we have this tiny footnote, and I love it. Definitely changes the game, makes it so the legacies are much more interesting for everybody, including the Seljuks, now that, you know, most importantly, I guess, renown is very, very much restricted. The hold of Jerusalem is now unlikely to accept populist demands. Also something that I have seen so much from many people out there saying, hey, you know what, Jerusalem, we just conquered it, and 5 years later they capitulated to a populist demand and became Muslim and Mashriki. What is up with that? Now they are very much more unlikely to do that, meaning that Jerusalem should actually stay Jerusalem. Good change. The opinion hit from being unallied as a clan vassal has been increased to 15 for non-powerful vassals and 30 for powerful vassals. I have the feeling personally actually that most people you know, they didn't really realize when they play clans that you're supposed to marry into your clan vassals to make it so that they get alliances, so that they then, you know, just kind of hang out and relax and have a good time, instead of being like, hey, we are not allied, we are enemies, my clan against yours. Just making this modifier a bit more intense, I think, will play into people realizing this and people, actually playing with it. I think that's a good move. Although I will say that I'm still not certain about the very basics of the clan gameplay there, because the alliances essentially make it so that if you have enough children, you will never have a faction, because all of your vassals will just be in your allies, and an ally can't be in a faction against you. So I sort of, would like a middle ground there, but honestly, this is just fine. It makes it so the clan vassals most certainly need to intermarry much more with their lieges, which is interesting to say the very least. Turks are now more likely to assimilate to local cultures than they were. I like the idea of that, but I would like it even more if they actually were to push, for example, into Anatolia to found the Rum Sultanate, and then sort of adopt into the Anatolian culture. That would be cool, and we'll see how this actually plays out. I don't see the Seljuks moving in 1066 at all, so let's just see what that actually does. In the current patch, the Seljuks essentially never attack the Byzantines, which is disappointing. I hope that would be changed, but I didn't see anything here in the patch notes, so we'll see where that is going. The patch note here is interesting, but whether it actually does anything, I can't tell you. Viking vassals are now more restricted when it comes to overseas conquests. Oh, thank you. Winning a great holy war as the attacker now refills all the levies and garrisons in the counties taken. This is incredibly powerful, making it so that Jerusalem will essentially spawn in as, a top-tier kingdom. I wonder whether it might even make it too powerful. I have seen Jerusalem survive for quite a bit if they didn't turn populist rebellion, but ultimately this is one of those things that you have to see in the time-lapses and in a variety of playthroughs, which I'm sure will be coming with so many people playing at the same time here. You can now manage the focus of your children even if they are landed, as long as you are their liege. Big fan of that. Of course, makes it so that you can land them and don't need to worry about them choosing a really bad education focus. Wandering characters with absurd amounts of golds will now tend to spend it all on improving themselves. No more inviting wanderers with 7,000 gold and banishing them. Yeah, there you go. That is a very easy patch. Germania can no longer be created by spiritually headed Christians who must create the HRE instead. Excellent. Good stuff. Increase the level of splendor gained from the Dynasty of Many Crowns decision from 75 to 1,000. Now that decision is actually worth it. That is an entire legacy. I honestly, quite frankly, Dynasty of Many Crowns requires you to have, I believe, 10 different independent king tier rulers of your dynasty. Honestly, if it was 1.5k or 2k, I wouldn't say no to that. Still would be balanced in my opinion, because that happening is so rare that it warrants a lot of splendor. Although then, then again, if you have 10 independent dynasty members that are kings, you make so much renown anyway. At that point, it doesn't really matter anymore, does it? Increase the area for Stammesherzog. Oh, actually, sorry, I need to correct myself. This was splendor. This was not actually renown, meaning this is the, the resource that gives you opinion and whatnot. And I believe makes it so that your children will be born with a higher amount of prestige, which is still amazing. So, I'm not complaining either. Increase the area for Stammesherzogtum to include parts of Bavaria and northern Germany, so all German cultures are able to gain the innovation. Very good. Jarl Hasty now starts at fame level 5 instead of 6. If you haven't reached the highest level of renown, no, of fame is the word here. There's so many different resources there, but you know what I mean. If you haven't gotten that achievement yet, just start a game with Jarl Hasty on Iron Man mode and you will immediately get it. That will no longer be possible as of the next patch. Restricted the intrigue scheming event confused heritage to players only, as the AI was going a bit wild with it and turning everyone into bastards unnecessarily. Yeah, that's the good stuff. This being fixed is great. I know there were a lot of people complaining. There is now a 5 to 10 year grace period on game start before populist factions will form. This is excellent for the AI, keeps everybody a bit more quiet at start, and I think that is necessary. The maximum penalty for being over your domain limit is now minus 100% taxes, and levies increased from 90%. If you vastly exceed your domain limit for more than 1 year, the grace period for new inheritance and conquests, all buildings will deactivate until your domain limit is lowered. And with that, North Korea mode is no more. It was, fun while it lasted, I suppose, but that is actually gone, because not only are your men-at-arms no longer receiving the bonuses from the buildings, but also, of course, the taxes and levies are now actually minus 100%. North Korea mode, I would argue, is actually dead. I don't think you can even run it to any degree. Maybe if you consistently imprison your baron vassals or something. I'm not entirely certain. I don't think so. I think this is it. This is just the death of that playstyle. Let's move on to the AI. Discouraged the AI from doing naval invasions when land invasions are feasible. Thank you. Gave the AI dancing lessons. Okay, I hope and I assume that that makes it so that they move much more efficiently. Gave the AI some self-confidence lessons, just because you can... I bet, by the way, that these were written by Maneth. They sound so comedic. They would be fitting for Maneth, I would argue. Gave the AI some self-confidence lessons, just because its liege is a complete coward. That doesn't mean it should avoid making or joining factions. It should only do so if they themselves are coward. I assume that there was a bit of a bug there where the AI was like, hey, my liege is a coward, I will not rebel against him. And now, of course, it is the opposite. Informed the AI of the existence of the player when it is trying to spread out to avoid attrition, meaning you can't just run into them and they will never know. You know, if you come with a 6k stack and they are stacked in 2k, 2k, and 2k, you can't just surprise the most far away 2k one, because now they will just unify whenever you come close. Good move, good move. Russian Vikings are now much more unlikely to conquer overseas. Thank you very much. Again, almost everything that was a clear and heavy imbalance is out of the game with this patch, except that construction exploit. This is one of those big things, you know. Sweden will no longer be colonizing Iberia. It's over for you, Sweden. Finally. Sternly told the AI that when it's trying to support the player, it shouldn't try to retreat just because the enemy is coming right at it, except if it hasn't yet arrived at the player's location. So it will no longer leave you alone. Instead, the AI will stick much, much closer to you. Good change. Good change. I think that works. You don't really need an army attach button if this actually works, and this looks very nice. The AI is now more likely to create holy orders, but gets less likely to do so the more holy orders a faith has. I'll admit it, yeah, I don't think in, like, maybe in my time lapses, but I never checked in the time lapses. But whenever I played a campaign, and my personal furthest was like, I want to say 1250. Everything else, I have played multiple games until like 1453, but all of those games were essentially just time lapses. But the games that I actually played, I don't remember the AI creating any holy orders, so I welcome this 100%, absolutely. The distance the AI is willing to raid is now based on its tier. Great, good stuff. If you're a king, go to Iberia. If you're a count, go to England. Told the AI that hunting down enemy armies in enemy territory is a good idea if it is safe to do so, even if it is currently in a defensive mode. Told the AI that it is a good idea to raise more troops when it already has troops raised. Yeah, so far the player is the only one doing that. If, you know, for example, a knight dies and you get a new one, then you can raise them individually and just follow up your army and then unify them. The AI didn't do it, now they do it. That is great news. Told the AI that it really doesn't make any sense to try to retreat from a dangerous enemy while at sea, because there's no sea fighting, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Told the AI that when deciding where to raid, it might make sense to measure the distance by sea, not as the crow flies. This is really, really good, because now, essentially, they just evaluate the sea tiles that they can move on. They no longer say, hey, I'm Rurik, I'm in Gardariki, I shall siege down the lands in Oguzil, you know, in the Turkish lands in the steppe. Or the Turkic lands. All of that has been fixed. I really like that. Should make for a much more realistic game when it comes to the regions that can be sieged down. And I just want to mention, I want to appeal to Paradox. Paradox, if you're watching this, can we please get the Hafsid Emirate to be able to raid overseas? I want to play the Hafsids, please. They deserve their place on Crete, and I deserve to be a pirate with them, but they can't raid because the Berbers are unable to raid overseas. That, you know, aside, Vikings should now mostly prefer to conquer contiguous areas overseas. Their vassals can still go their own way, though. So instead of being spread out everywhere, they will just say, hey, I will focus, for example, on Ireland. I will focus on, you know, Brittany, all that sort of stuff. Good stuff. Really good changes here. The AI will be in a much, much better state. I'm very excited for that. Let's move to the interface that I can't talk that much about because primarily, well, I don't actually know what that interface looks like, but let's still dive in. Add a situation warning you of when a vassal may leave your realm due to inheriting a foreign title. Good. That is something that many people just overlook, and now that that is an actual situation, I think it should be easier to catch. Add character list filters for not my faith, not my religion, not my culture, not my culture group. Has no claims, has claims on me, and not player dynasty. Good stuff. The character finder, actually, I noticed that I read that when I did one of the achievement guides, and somebody pointed out, or many people pointed out actually, they said, hey, I didn't even know you could search for traits, you could search for religions in this character finder. You can, it's great, you should still check it out, but it can be better, and here you can see that they are actively making it better. Very good. Added a current situation item for vassals that could be granted to their rightful liege. This is powerful, because you don't have to grant those vassals. Let's say you are the Holy Roman Emperor and there is a king of Germany. You could, of course, give him the count of, I don't know, Magdeburg, right? You could do that, of course, but at the same time, you don't have to, unless the king of Germany hates you and you want to make him happy. Getting this as a current situation is quite nice, I think. Makes it just so that it's more visible and that you can play around with it a bit more, and that, of course, especially new players are more aware of it. Added a warning suggestion in the current situation list for when having too few wives. Very good, especially now that the penalty is a bit more steep. Clicking a region in a cultural innovation tooltip now highlights it on the map. Thank you. Clearly just a bug, wasn't possible. When you saw the region, you know, you must be in this region, you can't actually click it. Now you can. Very nice. Disallow wasting a hook use on feudal contract negotiation if it's already fair or in favor of the vassal. So, if you, for example, give them the right of council guaranteed, in 1.0.3, you are able to also use a hook on that, despite just giving them a privilege. You're giving them a privilege and saying, and you have to take this deal. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Now this has been changed. If you give them a favor, or, you know, if it's fair, then you will no longer be able to even spend that hook. Very, very nice. Fixed mercenary troops not getting accounted for in a number of military strength breakdowns. I have seen that before. It is a bit, it throws you off. Sometimes the mercenaries do not show up and are simply not, you know, reflected in the actual military strength that you are being shown. I think this is nice, just makes it so, you know, that obviously you don't run into trap wars. Fix the child has no reason to stay at court. Message claiming the child is your stepbrother or sister rather than child. I literally just marked that so that I could say, stepbrother, what are you doing? Fix the combat predictor in some cases, ignoring some of your armies, thus predicting far worse odds than reality. Yeah, I saw that as well, actually. Whenever I would look over my army and my enemy's army, I would notice, hey, my army is actually considerably better, and yet the thing says that, you know, we are, for example, losing, or that we are equal. Good thing that that is being balanced out a bit, at least visually, making it so that in particular newer players can get into it easier. Fix the game pretending you could swap counselors and then doing nothing when you click the button, in cases where the current counselor isn't eligible for the other's counselor position. Now it'll say reassign instead and lead to the current counselor being fired. I saw that a lot. For example, women, I believe, can't become, I want to say, stewards? I'm not entirely certain, actually, whether they can or can't become that in Catholicism, but there is one of those issues where if it's just impossible, then nothing will happen, but the UI will not inform me about it. Now that it does, very, very nice. Fix the game sometimes claiming a marriage has no chance of children despite both parties being fertile. I have actually legitimately never seen this in my own games, but I have seen it reported to me from viewers, from people in the audience, and of course on the official CK3 Discord server, so that being fixed is nice. Fix the math sometimes overflowing for combat predictions for large battles, leading to just saying the odds are even, despite them being anything but. Yeah, it's true. When you run into an enemy army that has 500 people and you have 9,000 in 1.0.3, and I can't pronounce that patch anymore, it will just tell you, this is an equal fight. We don't know who will win. Yes, you have 4 reasons that you will win and they have 0, but I don't know. This could go anywhere. Yeah, that is fixed now. That is nice. I think makes it just much more easier for new players to understand how combat works. Hovering over options in the dropdowns in the barbershop will now show the resulting change on your character model. No more having to click through the options one by one. Thank you. That is very much appreciated. Knights no longer have such a disproportionate effect on army quality levels. This has no impact on gameplay, just makes the quality level more representative of the actual effectiveness of the army. Yeah, I agree with that, actually. The quality of the army says very little in 1.0.3, just because, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, if you have like 2 more knights in it, sometimes it goes to quality, like to the highest quality, and if you lose those 2 knights, it all of a sudden just sits at mediocre quality, despite that, of course, not actually having that effect. They were a bit overvalued. Made it clear in the knight game concept that knights represent both the character and their retinue of troops. A knight isn't single-handedly causing 30 casualties. Yeah, that was always the headcanon. We talked about that. I remember that. I'm pretty sure we talked about that in a dev diary talk, and yeah, now it's just confirmed. It's the knight and their retinue. This single guy isn't killing 30 people. Only show the select button in the MP lobby if the game has not been started yet. That is excellent, because it makes it so that players can't switch characters while the game is running, at least if I understand this correctly. If I'm wrong, that would be disappointing. If I am right, I will actually be hosting multiplayer games quite soon. Next month, October, should be the month of multiplayer games in the One Proud Bavarian community. I would be very excited for that. My problem really just was, you know, if we have 30 players and one of them is somebody that isn't playing in good faith, they can just randomly switch characters, give themselves money, and then switch back to theirs, and I can't do anything about it except if I notice, kick, or banish them. No longer the case, if I read this one correctly. Again, if I do, then we're gonna have some MP. Very excited for that. Shift plus F11 will now generate a picture of your current map mode and put it in your screenshots folder. Oh, that is so good. Thank you. I don't know why that feature wasn't in, but now it is, and there you go. You can now get these beautiful flat maps that we are used to from Paradox games. The Hajjaj version of the Pilgrim Trade now has unique art. The Muslim caliphates are now named Sunni Caliphate and such rather than Abbasid. 2 minor but good changes. The battle predictor is now no longer as pessimistic about your odds. Now a predicted 50% edge is enough to get you'll probably win, while before you needed a 133% edge. The other categories have had their thresholds tweaked as well. That's good stuff. Again, it just really makes it so, you know, I as an experienced player, I can look over the odds and say this is nonsense, the battle predictor here is wrong, but new players can't do that. This is excellent to make them understand when they are winning and when they are going to be losing. The faction interface now clearly shows who has been blocked temporarily from joining a faction and until when. Good stuff. Just so much goodness here when it comes to the user friendliness. The house and dynasty view now looks nicer for houses and dynasties with no living members. I don't know what that means. Let's find out. Track decisions now show as alerts instead of in the suggestion dropdown. That is really good. Makes it much easier to notice when something is happening, when you have the option to do something. When a war goal has multiple options, for example claim wars and holy wars, those are now sorted by tier, then roughly by distance from your realm rather than in arbitrary order. That's in particular good for example crusades, where it might have been just like an alphabetic order, where like, you know, the kingdoms in Tibet were just like randomly popping up when you were trying to choose, for example, Andalusia. That being changed now to being a geographical distance thing. Excellent. I really like that idea. You can now hover over innovations in modifier breakdowns. For example, manualism in the building cost breakdown to see the full info on the innovation. Just makes it so that you can more easily connect, you know, the modifiers that you get to the actual innovations. You now get a notification in the lower right corner when a part of your realm gets sieged by someone you're hostile to. Good stuff. Easy, especially when you have a considerably larger realm than is common. Just makes it so that you are able to see things. Art. Let's move on to art. Added ethnicities for East African, South Indian and Slavic and Arctic circumpolar. Cool stuff, more variety is always nice. Large map names look better at a small cost to tiny map names. Well, nobody cares for tiny map names, get out of here. Improved teenager animations to not be neutral but also show more personality like adults. Yeah, they were quite boring so far. In the starting menu, I hope that isn't the same. They all look so creepy. Have you ever seen the children stand in the starting screen? They're just like, they look like, oh, I'm gonna do something bad. Yeah, they look really creepy. I can't explain why. I hope that they change it as well. But most importantly, in-game, of course, the neutral stance is now substituted. Front end menus have been tidied up. No idea what that means because we haven't seen the UI. New siege window layout and art. No idea what that means. Improved HUD visuals. Nice, but no idea. Color-coded education trait icons. I believe that is essentially, you know, well, first of all, of course, inspired by their own game. In CK2, that was the case. And then by the mods here for CK3. That is now in the game vanilla. That is excellent. Increased contrast of character portraits. Also nice. Makes it so that they are a bit more visible. War overview now looks cooler. Culture window looks cooler too. And Great Holy War is actually great. Excited to see all of these changes. Visually, I have no idea though what they do right now. Added Easter egg DNA for Henrik Fareus, Debbie Lane, Hannah Löhmann, Maximilian Olbers, and Bianca Savazzi. Thank you to all of you, by the way. I just want to say that to everybody that is working on the game. I'm very excited, especially with how these patches, or this patch is being pushed out with this huge content pack. Now we're going to skip localization, because this is just, we fixed some stuff, and that's nice. I agree, but I have nothing to say about updated the name of the Crusader King trait for Muslims. There's no info that I can give you on that. Game content. Added a fine for the desired numbers of spouses and polygamous faiths, allows to specify the value per primary title tier level. So this is moddable, if I understand this correctly. Makes it so that you can now go and say, hey, in my fantasy mod you need to have at least 12 wives, or you will be unable to get all of the piety that you want. Added a new Ayar cultural minute arms for Iranian cultures. Cool stuff. Don't know what they do, don't know what they are, but I appreciate that. More variety is always great. Reviving Taltosism. This is close to my heart. I love this one. Now allows you to choose between vanilla Taltosism and swapping out one tenet for a scripted alternative whilst promulgating the restoration. Reviving Taltosism will now convert Magyar group counties more generously, especially in Magyar areas with less German influence. That is so good. I really like the idea of reviving Taltosism because it is still a topic even in 1066 with, you know, House Aber trying to, well, reintroduce it sort of, just a tiny little bit, and getting rid of the influence of the church, of the Latin church, and failing to do so right before the game starts. This is a really interesting take. I really like the idea. I really want to play in Hungary because of this, honestly. I'm gonna definitely give that a run. I really like the idea in particular here when it comes to swapping out one tenet. We'll see how that actually works when we get to it. User modding, there's a lot of good stuff here. I don't really want to mention anything, it's just like there's a lot more triggers and variables that you can now influence, but I don't think any of that is really relevant to you. Databases. Added Saka culture to the Tarim Basin, and here is where I have to disappoint you, because this is cool. The Saka culture was sadly forgotten. I believe they were an Iranian culture that were essentially nomads in the steppes. I might be slightly wrong, please do correct me if I am, but I was hoping we would also be reading Goths, Arboreans, Slovenians, or well, Carantanians, you know, all that sort of, the minor cultures that have been forgotten. But the Saka culture appears to be the only one. I hope at the very least that soon, in the not so far future, we're going to see more cultures return that we already knew from CK2, and maybe even additional cultures make a first, a first time appearance. But for the moment, it's just the Saka culture. Added additional rulers in Sapmi for both bookmarks, both to add more variety with independent tribes, as well as splitting up the large realm of the Finnish rulers in Ulu. Good stuff, just balances that region out a bit, makes it more interesting. Added the Guryu circuit as an independent realm in 867 to better represent the history of the area. Aquitaine now has Salic law, male-only title-specific succession in 867. Changed the names for a couple of duchies in eastern Germany. Ostmark is now named Nordmark, while previous Nordmark is named Mecklenburg, the Billungmark. This particular one drove me mad privately, but here we are. I'm very happy about this now. When I looked at the requirements to found the HRE, I was like, what are you talking about? But here we are, it's done. Then there are some other changes here. Ekundayo of the Benin dynasty no longer lives to be more than 200 years old, causing her to still be alive in 1066. She now passes away at a more reasonable age. Fixed the Count of Grison, accidentally being independent in 867, yet he's in between, like he's in the Alps there. Fixed 2 Dukes of Poland, being represented as full kings between 1031 and 1058. Very interesting stuff. Poland had a long time of not recognizing a king. Very cool stuff that is actually now, historically portrayed. House of Wittelsbach, this is very important, is now playable in 1066. Otto I, Count of Cheyenne, has been granted the County of Rothenburg, which encompasses the area of the castle. Very, very good stuff. I'm going to play House of Wittelsbach, not too far into the future, I can already tell you that much. Prince Ibrahim Aglabid of the Sultanate of Africa is now a vassal under his father, which is excellent because that should make it so that the Aglabids are much more stable and should be able to repel the constant incursion of the Holy Roman Empire into Tunis. Volga Bulgaria is now feudal in 1066. Don't know what to think about that because it feels like that might make them either too strong or too weak, but we'll have to see how that goes in the time lapses. Corrected the Safarid Tarid war to make the Safarid the attacker rather than defender. Yeah, it's true, the Safarids are way stronger. It always confused me that in the game the Tahirids were attacking them when they had no chance. If the Safarids successfully win the war, they will gain the duchies of Herat and Nishapur. That's quite nice. The province of Zeeland now begins under the control of the HRE in 1066. That solves the issue of that permanent initial war there between the French crown and the HRE. Bug fixes. Fix not being able to reform your faith with the same doctrines. Entirely different doctrines is only required if creating a new faith instead of reforming one. This is nice. Makes it so that the cost of reforming a faith is considerably lower because you don't have to choose different doctrines if you don't want to, just for the record. So I think this is a nice stuff and it makes sense as well. Reforming a faith just means you're not changing the nature of it necessarily. You can, of course, but you're just organizing it, right? So I think this makes a lot of sense changing that. Fixed excommunication being available for faiths with communion but non-spiritual heads. Yeah, I like that. I know a lot of people will be like, but that's how I played the game. Yeah, but it makes it a bit too easy. I think this is very fair. This was also not allowed in Crusader Kings II. It must have been an oversight. Now you can't excommunicate your vassals constantly if you're the temporal head. Fixed siege phase timer and moral loss modifiers applying via the owner of the holding. This one is hilarious. For example, the owner having the military engineer trait would make it faster for others to siege their holdings. That's excellent. That's such an excellent bug. Like, it's just really funny. Fixed siege is not immediately starting if a hostile army is standing in a holding that ceases to be occupied. So, for example, if you're sitting on a holding that you want to take but is taken by somebody else and that somebody else ends their war, now you just immediately start sieging. You don't need to, like, start walking and stop walking. That's just user-friendliness. Fix the game in some cases, releasing people from prison when it shouldn't, such as when they become rulers. Good stuff. I've seen so many complaints about prisons being emptied because somebody just became a ruler. Good stuff. Instead, you can keep them in your prison and then, the new king of France, for example, well, either you can just, do radical things to them, or you can say, hey, pay me some money. Giving out a title while above your domain limit will no longer give you stress. Previously, it gave you stress without warning you. Yep, that is true, and it's also just, like, if you're over your domain limit, you might be greedy, but let's be real here. You're not a lunatic. You realize that you can't manage 100 provinces. So, like, giving it out shouldn't give you stress. This is ideal as far as I'm concerned. The Promote Christian Settlements decision now gives Hungarian culture all innovations and innovation progress of Mongol culture. Good stuff, just rebalances that a bit. Titles with title-specific succession laws, for example, male preference, that match your realm law are no longer considered separate when calculating partition splits, so they'll no longer always go to your primary heir unless the law is actually distinct from your realm laws. I cut into that a bit in my succession inheritance tutorial video as well, and I think that's exactly what I pointed out there as well. It was a bug, and it has been confirmed as a bug. It is fixed in the new version that comes out tomorrow. A faction will no longer courteously greet you before calling you a tyrant. Hilarious. Bastards can no longer create cadet branches. Of course, they're not destined to do that. If they do outland, they will actually found their own dynasty, and if they are legitimized, they will just be a part of your house and no longer be a normal bastard. Blocked Vlach rulers from taking the Unite the Slavs and Unite the Southern Slavs decisions. If you don't know that, Vlachs are not Slavs. So that's why. Characters can no longer get different tiers of the same congenital trait. It was very powerful, but it is now gone. Characters that should be naked no longer wear cloaks. Good stuff. Children are no longer allowed to partake in an intrigue challenge event. Children are no longer encouraged to pick up more spouses. Children can no longer be educated by hardened criminals. I love all of this stuff. But yeah, essentially there were, I guess, a lack of age checks, right? Where it's just like, we need a character that talks to you here in this court, and sometimes they would pick a kid. Of course, that is not intentional and has been fixed. Children, imprisoned and incapable vassals can no longer demand that you host a feast. Imagine little Tommy walking up to you saying, "Hey, I need a feast." Yeah, all of that is gone. Very good stuff. Fix the AI recruiting guests because they themselves had a good claim rather than the guest. Also hilarious stuff. Imagine being the king of Poland with a claim on Hungary and you go like, "You there, yeah, I shall recruit you so that I can push my claim." Makes no sense. Hilarious. I love it. Fixed fixed typo, the name for the county of Padua, which was incorrectly named Paduan. I can't read anymore, but I like that, and in my headcanon, that was probably an insider developer joke, Padawan, right? That is what they did there, and then they just forgot about it. If your liege declares war on your war target, your war is invalidated. That is I can see why that is the case. I have abused this multiple times in CK2. I can't remember whether I've done it in CK3, but essentially, when you see your vassal at war with a neighbor of yours, and you also have a war reason to go to war with that neighbor, anything that is occupied by your vassal, even if that vassal isn't technically part of your war, would count towards your war score, making it much, much easier for you to finish that war, and your vassal would never finish it, because obviously you would always be ahead in war score. So on that note, I think it makes sense. But I also sort of feel like, I would like it if the player had some more agency. If the player could say, "I want to stay at war, and I want to keep pushing, even if my liege is also coming for his own war, and gets my war score and then his own on top." I think it would be nice if you could still, you know, maybe take a look at that. But either way, I think this makes sense. I can't exploit the mechanic now anymore, so that checks out. Moved blocking traits from declare bloodline holy decision to be stress impacts instead. So instead of, you know, if you have a trait that doesn't fit, instead of that blocking you entirely, you just get some stress. Because, you know, when you have the reputation of being from a holy family and you are not holy, then that must stress you out. Only the Byzantine Emperor now wears the Imperial Crown. Good stuff. Ultramare culture no longer discovers up to 7 new innovations every time a new ruler adopts it. Yeah, that's insanity, and that's fixed. Ultramare culture now correctly retains all innovation that its parent culture has discovered instead of only some of them. I think this same problem also existed with Portuguese. I don't think that actually has been fixed, the Portuguese one. I can't see it here in the P section, so like, we'll have to test that. People are now less eager to marry people they are terrified of. People that are terrified of you are now more likely to agree to marriage as long as they don't have to marry. So essentially, if you send an offer to somebody that is terrified of you, they will say, "Please, no, I don't want to spend my life with you." But if you say, "I want that lady from your court," they will say, "Yes, we can do that. No problem whatsoever." And let me just, can I just pick that up here? Does that break it? No, there you go. Beautiful. Reforming to feudal now grants the same amount of random buildings as previously built in the province. That was one of the huge things that everybody was bringing up, of course, saying, hey, when you become feudal, you lose everything, you are essentially wrecked. That is now fixed, that is excellent. Finally, that is actually done. Removed some game log spam in multiplayer. I hope, and I'm not certain, but I hope that they mean whenever a character dies, every player gets a mandatory message that says, character changed by this player. I hope that they took that out. I think that message needs to go. I think that message is really bad. I'm not certain whether they did, but I hope that's what they mean there. The Sultanate of Rum now no longer takes dynasty names, always retaining its title name regardless of the holder's culture. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course, they named it after the region, because that was held by the former Roman Empire, or well, formerly held by the Roman Empire, by the East Roman Empire, and that is now fixed. Very nice. I just wish that we would actually see the Sultanate of Rum, unless the player's involved, because right now the AI, I've never seen them take it, but that's okay. And here's the big thing, I teased this earlier. Split the take vows decision into two, one for asking someone to go to a holy order, the other to a monastery. So it's actually more powerful now, because originally you were only able to ask people to take the vows if a holy order existed. Now you can already do that earlier with a monastery, you know, like just in general, but they changed it so that only strong hooks will make it so that they can be forced, meaning it's actually harder. I welcome this. I think this is nice. It brings back a CK2 mechanic and just makes it so that everything is a bit more interesting, because you need to gain a strong hook, and then you also can actually go ahead. Before that, you could just, you know, found your own holy order, and once you did that, essentially everybody goes into the damn monastery. Spread Assyrian culture a little. I think that is nice. That's interesting, not just for historical purpose, but also because Assyrian culture next to Sephardi and Ashkenazi was most certainly the most powerful culture, because they were in an incredibly rich region and only had they had two provinces. I was thinking about it. They had two provinces, and I tested this, I did a run with that, and if you played Assyrian back in the day, you essentially were building rocket ships while everybody was still using clubs, because you were only two provinces in one of the most developed regions of the world. That has changed now a bit, at least, with the Assyrian culture being spread. Interesting stuff. The Form the Swiss Confederation decision can now be undertaken, even if the HRE doesn't exist. That's good stuff, because before that it would just never happen. The Head of Faith can no longer excommunicate themselves. Nice. The Mongol Empire will no longer destroy itself when winning a war. The Mongol Empire will now always declare the correct wars when arriving. I saw the Mongol Empire disappearing out of nowhere quite often, and I always was asking why. Here's the answer. When they win a war, they would just sometimes stop existing. Tooltips clean up 4. Don't know what that means. If you want to tell me, let me know. You're no longer malnourished and obese for life. Yeah, once you became obese, you would no longer ever lose that trait, even if you tried to lose it, so that's actually nice. You can no longer demand conversion from imprisoned foreign rulers. That was such a heavy exploit. Whenever you had anybody in your prison, you could abduct all of them and just make them your religion. It was crazy. Your wife will now leave your kids behind if she flees your tyranny. That is good, makes it a bit more attractive to, you know, go against your wife in the first place. Allow Shia Zandak heresies to crop up in Shia counties more consistently. That is nice. I think a bit more action in the Muslim world in general would be quite entertaining. For the moment, it just seems a fairly one-dimensional with the Seljuks in the east, and then in the west, everybody just crumbling all the time because the Christians keep taking over northern Africa. I hope that this just makes it so that we see a bit more fervor, maybe a bit more peasant leaders, heresiarchs, all that sort of stuff, making the entire region more interesting. Blocked off promote Christian settlements decision in 1066, as it has already happened. Made Ethelred the first one significantly more unlucky whilst Alfred is alive and heir. Meaning, he's more likely to die and you can just inherit, you don't need to plot against him, you can be Alfred the hero that doesn't kill his brother. A good change, I think, just makes it so a bit more historically accurate, and if you are a Viking, you will actually face Alfred, an actual legend, and not Ethelred. Made form the Archduchy of Austria easier, more flexible, and slightly less anachronistic. Made forming Switzerland easier, cheaper, more flexible, and more historical. So all of these decisions just have been revamped to make it so that they are more viable, not just for the player, but also hopefully for the AI. I would like the AI to actually use the decisions instead of just, you know, the player when they actually try hard for it. Restoring the HRE no longer requires holding the electors. If I remember this correctly, when I tested it, you actually needed to hold the duchies and the counties of the electors. Ridiculous. Like, in person, I mean. Apparently no longer the case. I'm a big fan of that. I think that's a great thing. I would like the HRE to actually be founded in 867. I'll just say it. I wish the AI would be more frequent about doing it. They just never do. Maybe this change will actually get it done, but we'll have to see. And then we are actually here at the bottom after 52 minutes. My god, it's such a huge patch. And I skipped so much, where I would argue you don't actually have to know about those things. You will see them naturally. They're either minor changes or they're just some balancing changes. But would you look at that? 52 minutes. That's how thick this patch is. The Sicilian Parliament and Hall of Heroes are now built on the correct type of building slot. Yeah, it misplaced it. I think actually, like when you get the Sicilian decision, I want to argue, and I've done this ages ago, so I can't quite remember, but I want to argue that it actually never builds the Parliament because it tries to build it in a county building when it should be either a duchy or a special building, meaning that it is never actually built. At least from what I remember. That being fixed is very nice. The founding of a holy order as the Canossa is saved as a global flag for the Give a Dog a Bone achievement. That's actually one of the things. So this is nice because it just makes it so that that achievement is slightly fixed. But you know what? Let me actually check here. I don't think... Ah, here we go. I actually found it. Okay, sorry. I completely overlooked that. Intended achievements where you need to start as a particular character can now also be accomplished after that character's death. It's fixed. It's all fixed. The only thing that isn't fixed is the infinite money construction cancelling exploit. But honestly, just don't do that one. The game has been revamped. It's insanity. I'm incredibly happy. I'm incredibly happy. You know, with these games, with the size of these games, you can never know How do they come out? Will they be incredibly buggy? Will they work? Will they be fine? Will they not be fine? CK3 came out in an incredibly powerful state. Bug-wise, feature-wise, CK3 had the world to offer in comparison to any predecessor in the grand strategy genre. And now that not even a month has passed, we're looking at a situation where everything that was still a kink, except the minor exceptions, has been fixed. Now, hopefully tomorrow, even with that dev diary, if there is a dev diary tomorrow, let's talk about future content. Let's talk about future content. I'm super excited for that. I want to see where this game is going. It's in an incredible state. I hope that you are enjoying it as much as I am. And this was me talking about this dev diary, about this patch. It's coming out tomorrow. I hope you will enjoy it. I most certainly will. And thank you for watching. Holy moly, now this was an insanely long video. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you to the members of the channel, the barons, the counts, and the dukes, and to all of you. Go and enjoy patch 1.1 of Crusader Kings 3 tomorrow. Later, alligator.